Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves memory, more specifically, testing memory. Now, the technical term that psychologists use when they talk about seeing how much a person can remember is retention. Essentially, how much can a person retain? How much have they kept, have they retained in their memory? So whenever we're going to talk about measuring memory, technically we're testing retention. There are three general ways to test retention, test how much information a person has managed to keep. Two of these should be very familiar to you from your educational experiences. The third, probably not so much, although it sounds like it should be something you're familiar with, but psychology does it a little different. This oddball one is called relearning. Now this sounds like something like, you learned something and you didn't learn it well enough, so you have to relearn it for the final or what. That's not what we're talking about here. In a test of relearning, what happens is, generally, a subject is given a list of words to memorize. When we're talking laboratory experiments in memory, we're talking lists of words, usually random words. They're given a list of words to memorize, and the time it takes them to memorize those words is noted. So let's say it takes them 30 minutes to memorize the list of words. And then a certain amount of time passes, depending on what the researchers want. Individuals brought back, they are given the same list of words, in the same order, exact same list of words, and asked to memorize it again. And again, the amount of time it takes to memorize that is noted, and then the two times are compared. So it took them 30 minutes to learn it the first time. Maybe it only took them 15 minutes to learn it the second. Researcher would say, well, 15 minutes is half of 30 minutes, therefore the person retained 50% of the information. We don't do that in school. Not in any school I've ever attended, and trust me, I've been to a lot. Okay? That isn't how it worked. It's pretty much purely a laboratory sort of thing. However, you have almost certainly encountered a test of recognition. Now these are named exactly what they are, pretty much. So a test of recognition means that you need to recognize the correct answer when you see it. So what we're talking here in tests of recognition are multiple choice tests. The answer is right there. You simply have to pick it out. Or matching, draw a line between the two that fit. Or fill in the blank when you're given a list of potential words to fit in. The idea behind recognition is, like I said, you need to recognize the right answer. The right answer is there in front of you. You simply must pick it out of a lineup. And a police lineup, by the way, is a test of recognition. Now, most individuals tend to like tests of recognition. It makes perfect sense because the answer is right there in front of you. What's not to like? So we do like tests of recognition. However, they're not necessarily easy. I have students come into my classes and say, oh, it's a multiple choice test. It'll be easy. Oh, believe me, there are ways to toughen up multiple choice tests. There are ways to make these difficult, and it all depends on how plausible, how likely the distractors are. They are there to distract you from the right answer. So how difficult a multiple choice test is depends a lot on how plausible, how likely, how similar the distractors are to the correct answer. If you have distractors that are completely and totally and inarguably wrong, that makes multiple choice tests easy. But you can have distractors that are wrong but are similar enough or familiar enough that they can be very confusing to a person who doesn't know the information. For instance, in my multiple choice test, if I'm asking for a definition of a word, which I don't often do, those are pretty simple. But if I ask for a definition, I'm not going to, for instance, give what the definition that is correct right out of the text, and then I'm going to take 3 definitions that either aren't in the text or from completely different chapters or whatever, because that makes it easy. Instead, what I will often do is I may take the correct answer and reword it so that it means the same but doesn't look the same. There, I just made it difficult. Or, as distractors, I could use definitions from the same part of the same chapter, so they all look equally familiar. You can't always work on familiarity when it comes to recognition. You may have to work on actual knowledge, because they all may look equally familiar. As an example, of that, among other things. Let's say I gave you a handful of change. I give you a handful of change, and I say, pick out the pennies. Now, if you're familiar with American coinage, you know that that's a very easy thing to do. You could probably ask a 4-year-old to pick out the pennies. They'd be fine. Because pennies are the only coins in U.S. currency that are made out of copper. All the rest of them are made out of silver, or at least something that looks like silver, with the exception of the Sacagawea dollar that's more of a gold color. But pennies are the only copper-colored coins. They're the only ones that have that reddish or greenish, if they've been left out for too long, tinge to them. So it's easy. Handful of change, pick out the pennies. Not a problem. Try it now. Don't look at your change. Okay, put the change away. Here are a list of 10 possible pennies. Pick one. Which is the correct penny? And do it without cheating. Right now, you're probably staring at all those things going, I don't know, they all look good. Which is exactly what you should be doing. Because all of these are plausible. They're all the right color. They've all got Abraham Lincoln on them. They've all got things that coins tend to have, although coins often have different combinations of these things. That makes this difficult. So it's not only an example of a difficult multiple choice test, but it's also an example of how we can look at things for years, if not decades, and never see them. We don't have to really look at a penny. It's the copper one. So you never really looked at a penny probably before now. And asking you to pick this out then becomes very, very, very difficult. By the way, it is fun sometimes to look at your change, because you'd be amazed at what you get handed for as change. Canadian money, of course. I grew up near the Canadian border, and quite frankly, as I was growing up, the shopkeepers took Canadian coins, at least, in pretty much the same way that they took American ones. It really didn't matter. And of course, these days, at least currently as I'm recording this, Canadian money is actually worth just a wee bit more than American money is. So it would make sense to take Canadian money. But I have gotten coins from the Caribbean. I've gotten coins from China. I've gotten coins from Europe. It is fun sometimes to just look at your change. By the way, if this is just killing you because you don't know which is the right one, it's A. A is the correct penny. Now, the answers that I tend to get the most when I do this in my classes, my face-to-face classes, are G. Note that G is identical to A except for G has United States of America instead of In God We Trust. Most other coins have United States of America in that spot. Pennies don't. They have In God We Trust. I get a lot of J's, which is correct except that Abe Lincoln's facing in the wrong direction. And I believe that in most other American coins, perhaps all other American coins, J is how the people normally face. But again, the penny is different. The other one I get a lot of is I, and I find this very amusing because it's an example of having the right information but not quite the right arrangement of it. Because if you look at I, notice that from about the middle of Abe's tie on up, it's correct. The 1 cent is also correct, but it belongs on the other side of the coin. So you're conflating, you're reconstructing this information incorrectly. So just do remember, the one thing I really want you to keep from this particular experiment here is just because something is multiple choice doesn't mean it's easy. Do not go, oh, it's multiple choice, it'll be easy. You may have run into easy multiple choice in high school. Welcome to college. Welcome to university. Rules are different. We expect more of you. Now, those are tests of recognition where the answer is in front of you. The last test of memory are tests of recall. Now, the word recall, of course, itself means that you have to remember something. In tests of recall, you are not given the answer. You are given a general retrieval cue. And then you are asked to come up with the answer yourself. So you're given a retrieval cue, you're asked to come up with the answer. Now, this is, for an example of this would be, for instance, if I said to you, okay, what day is your birthday? And you probably just had that pop into your head, right? Birthday is the retrieval cue there. Again, it's almost like a search engine. You type in something into Google and it goes into the internet and it retrieves information that is using that particular retrieval cue. People don't tend to like tests of recall quite as well as they like tests of recognition, because in tests of recall, of course, you have to come up with the answer yourself. And if you don't have a really good retrieval cue, or if you use maintenance rehearsal instead of elaborative rehearsal, you may not be able to remember the information given that general retrieval cue. The people who do like tests of recall, by the way, and this is probably a blatant and horrible generalization, are the people who have a tendency when they get a retrieval cue on a test to write down absolutely everything they have ever learned about the topic, hoping the right answer is in there somewhere. And I gotta tell you, that's why when I give short answer tests, I give a word limit. You cannot write down and just, regurgitate the entire contents of your brain onto the page and expect me to pick out the answer. And that makes it more difficult. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of the research looking at memory has used lists of random words. And they found a very interesting phenomenon when people are given a list of words, whether it's random words or a grocery list or a speech or a song or whatever else. People tend to remember the stuff at the beginning and the stuff at the end, but not so much the stuff in the middle. This is called the serial position effect. Note the spelling of cereal. It's not breakfast. Okay? Serial position effect says we remember the stuff at the beginning of a list and the stuff at the end of a list, but not so much the stuff in the middle. The middle tends to kind of go away. It's the mushy middle, okay? And if you've ever tried to memorize a grocery list, you've probably noticed this. You got the first stuff and you got the last stuff, but the stuff in the middle, if you have more than 3 or 4 items, tends to go away. Or if you've ever tried to memorize a speech or a song. Very often, you've got the beginning, you've got the end, but not so much the middle. It's amusing sometimes, for instance, to watch small children say the American Pledge of Allegiance, because they're just learning it. They got the beginning, they've got a rousing finish, but the middle just kind of, they start going homina, 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 okay? Little kids, okay. They're like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And... liberty and justice for all. Okay, they've got the beginning, they've got the end, they lose the middle. Serial position effect. Now, scientists, of course, never being able to leave well enough alone, have actually broken this down. Remembering the stuff at the beginning of the list is called the primacy effect. Primacy, primary, prime, first. Okay. They think the primacy effect comes because most people learn lists from the beginning. And even if you're using maintenance rehearsal, you bang away at something long enough, you go over that word 114 times, you're probably going to remember it. They think the primacy effect is due to the information actually making it into the long-term memory. Remembering the stuff at the end is called the recency effect. Recent, most recent, the stuff at the end is recent. And the idea here is that the recency effect occurs because that information that was last is still rummaging around in your short-term memory, or perhaps you're still rehearsing it. Which is why a lot of people, for instance, when they're trying to memorize a list and you give them a piece of paper or whatever to write it down, they immediately write the last stuff down because they've still got that banging around in their short-term memory, and so they want to write it down before they lose it. This is why sometimes teachers suggest, if you are learning a speech or you are learning a song or a poem or your grocery list perhaps, that instead of starting at the beginning and working your way that way, or even starting at the end and working your way up, that you should start in the middle. And certainly practice the middle more than you practice the beginning or the end to try to avoid this serial position effect.